My name is Amanda Montgomery, and at 28 years old, I never expected to hear from my father again. 3 years of complete silence had taught me to stop hoping. Then last Tuesday, an envelope appeared with his familiar handwriting. My heart nearly burst with joy. When I called my billionaire grandfather, Robert, to share the news, his response chilled me. He demanded to see it immediately. As I slid the letter across his mahogany desk, he frowned. "Look closer," he said. What I discovered next changed everything. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you're watching from in the comments and hit that subscribe button if you've ever received unexpected news that changed your life. I built a good life for myself in Seattle. Working as a journalist for one of the major newspapers fulfilled my lifelong dream of uncovering truth and telling important stories. My downtown apartment might have been small, but it had character and a view of the city I loved. I earned respect in my field, particularly for my coverage of financial crimes and corporate fraud. The irony that my career path was inspired by my own family drama wasn't lost on me. My grandfather, Robert Montgomery, raised me since I was 11. A self-made billionaire with investments spanning real estate, technology, and manufacturing, he had the resources to give me everything but tried his best not to spoil me. He insisted I work summer jobs as a teenager, apply for scholarships, and make my own way as much as possible. Money is a tool, Amanda, not a substitute for character, he would remind me often. While Grandpa Robert was a constant in my life, my father Jason was anything but. Dad struggled with alcohol for as long as I could remember, which contributed to my parents' divorce when I was 7. Mom passed away from cancer when I was 11, leaving me in my grandfather's care. Dad would float in and out of my life during those years, sometimes disappearing for months before showing up with grand promises and ambitious plans. The relationship between my father and grandfather was always tense. Dad resented Grandpa's wealth and success, claiming it cast a shadow he could never escape. His business ventures repeatedly failed, often because he'd abandoned them midway for some new, guaranteed opportunity. Grandpa would offer advice, Dad would ignore it, then inevitably ask for money when things fell apart. The final blow came 3 years ago at my 25th birthday dinner. Dad arrived late, slightly drunk, and immediately picked a fight with Grandpa. "You think your money makes you God?" Dad shouted across the table of the private dining room. "You use it to control everyone around you, especially my daughter." "I've done nothing but try to help you," Grandpa responded, his voice measured but cold. "And I've been there for Amanda when you couldn't be bothered." "I'm her father." Dad slammed his fist on the table. "But you've turned her against me with your mansions and connections and opportunities. How am I supposed to compete with that?" I tried to intervene, begging them both to stop. "This is my birthday," I pleaded. "Can we please just have one peaceful family dinner?" But Dad was beyond reasoning. He threw down his napkin and stood up. "I'm done," he declared. "Done with your judgment, done with your condescension, done with this whole toxic situation." He turned to me with tears in his eyes. "Amanda, when you're ready to have a relationship with me that doesn't involve him controlling everything, you know how to reach me." And then he walked out. I ran after him into the parking lot, calling his name. He got into his car without looking back and drove away. That was the last time I saw my father. I tried calling him the next day, but his number was disconnected. I drove to his small apartment across town, but he had already cleared everything out. I sent emails, messages through mutual friends, even hired a service to find his new address and sent physical letters there. Nothing but silence in return. The first year was the hardest. I cycled through grief, anger, and confusion. Had he really cut me off completely because of my relationship with my grandfather? How could he just disappear without even giving me a choice? I threw myself into work, earning my first major promotion by breaking a story about investment fraud. By the second year, I had developed a ritual of writing him letters I never sent. I kept them in a box under my bed. Dozens of updates about my life, questions about his, and pleas to reconnect. Sometimes I dreamed he had returned, only to wake up to his absence all over again. In the third year, I finally reached something like acceptance. Dad had made his choice, and I couldn't force him to be in my life. I focused on building stronger relationships with friends, advancing my career, and my weekly dinners with Grandpa Robert, who remained my rock despite his demanding business empire. Which brings me to that Tuesday morning 3 weeks ago when everything changed. It started as an ordinary day. I woke up at 6, went for my usual run along Lake Washington, showered, and made coffee. I was reviewing research for a story about corporate tax evasion when my doorbell rang. A delivery person handed me a small package. No return address, just my name and address written in a handwriting I would recognize anywhere. My father's. I stood frozen in my doorway, staring at the package in my hands. The delivery person had already disappeared down the hallway, leaving me alone with this unexpected connection to my father. My hands trembled as I closed the door and carried the package to my kitchen counter. The brown paper wrapping was slightly wrinkled, as if it had been carried around for a while before being sent. My name and address were written in the same slanted script I remembered from birthday cards and notes in my lunchbox when I was a child. I ran my fingertip over the blue ink, feeling the slight indentation on the paper. For 3 minutes, I just stared at it, afraid that opening it might somehow break the fragile thread that had suddenly appeared between us. What could he possibly have to say after 3 years of silence? Was he sick? Moving even further away? Or was this finally the apology and reconnection I had dreamed about? I took a deep breath and carefully unwrapped the package. Inside was a plain white envelope, a faded family photograph from a fishing trip when I was about 8 years old, and a small wooden carving of a bird in flight. The carving was beautiful, detailed work that I immediately recognized as my father's handiwork. He had always been skilled with a knife and a piece of wood, creating little treasures during his periods of sobriety. With shaking hands, I opened the envelope and unfolded the single page inside. Dear Amanda, I know it's been too long. Not a day has passed that I haven't thought of you. I've been working on myself and have made some important connections. There's a business opportunity that could change everything for us. I want to make things right. I'll be in touch again soon with more details. This time will be different, I promise. The bird represents freedom from the past. Keep it close. Love always, Dad. The letter was short, vague, and frustratingly light on details. What business opportunity? What connections? And why reach out now after 3 years of ignoring my attempts to contact him? Yet despite my questions and the flutter of anger in my chest, I felt a surge of hope. He had thought about me every day. He wanted to make things right. I picked up the wooden carving, admiring how he had captured the sense of movement in the bird's wings. It felt significant somehow, like it contained a message beyond his written words. The photograph showed the three of us, me, Dad, and Grandpa Robert, standing on the edge of a lake, holding up fish we had caught. I was grinning wildly in the picture, sandwiched between the two men who had each shaped my life in profound ways. My weekly call with Grandpa was scheduled for that evening, but I couldn't wait. I dialed his number, and his assistant put me through immediately, a privilege I rarely used. Amanda, is everything all right? Grandpa's voice was concerned. Our unscheduled calls usually meant some kind of problem. Grandpa, I got a letter from Dad, I blurted out, emotion making my voice crack. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. What did it say? He finally asked, his tone careful and measured. I read him the short message word for word. "I see," he said when I finished. "And you're sure it's from your father?" "Of course I am. I know his handwriting, Grandpa." Another long pause. "I think you should bring the letter here right away if you can." Something in his voice made me uneasy. "Is something wrong?" "I'd rather discuss it in person. Can you come now?" I agreed and drove the 30 minutes to his estate in the wealthy suburb outside Seattle. The security gate opened automatically as I approached, recognizing my car. I parked in front of the grand colonial home where I had spent my teenage years. Martha, the housekeeper who had been with my grandfather for decades, greeted me with a warm hug. "He's in his study," she said. "He canceled his afternoon meetings after your call." That surprised me. Grandpa Robert rarely rescheduled business for personal matters. I found him standing by the window, looking out at the manicured gardens. At 70, he still stood tall and imposing, his silver hair perfectly trimmed, his casual attire still managing to look sophisticated. He turned as I entered, and I saw concern etched in the lines around his eyes. "Let me see it," he said without preamble. I handed him the letter, the photo, and the wooden carving. He examined each item carefully, his expression growing more troubled by the second. "What is it?" I asked, anxiety building in my chest. "You're scaring me, Grandpa." He picked up the letter again and handed it to me. "Look closer at the handwriting, Amanda. Really look." I studied the familiar slant of the letters, the way the loops in the L's and E's curved. And then, with Grandpa's prompting, I began to notice subtle differences I had missed in my emotional state. The pressure on certain downstrokes was heavier than Dad's usual touch. The spacing between words was slightly wider, and the signature, while similar, lacked the distinctive hook on the final N of Jason. "I don't understand," I said, a cold feeling spreading through my stomach. "I received a letter last week," Grandpa said quietly. "Allegedly from your father, asking for money for a business venture." "You did? Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I wasn't sure it was genuine, and I didn't want to upset you unnecessarily." He opened a drawer in his desk and pulled out an envelope. "Compare them." The second letter was similar in tone but more specific about the alleged business opportunity, a real estate development that needed initial investment. It requested that Grandpa Robert transfer $200,000 to a specified account as a first step. Looking at the two letters side by side, the discrepancies in handwriting became even more obvious. They were good imitations, but definitely not my father's authentic handwriting. "Someone is pretending to be Dad," I whispered. "But who would do that? And why?" "That's what we need to find out," Grandpa said grimly. "Someone is clearly trying to use your father's identity to scam money from us. The question is, where is your real father? And does he know about this?" My mind raced with horrible possibilities. Was this just a cruel prank? Or was something more sinister going on? And if these letters weren't really from my father, then where was he? Was he safe? The 3 years of silence suddenly took on a much darker meaning. "I thought he was just angry and stubborn," I said, my voice breaking. "What if something happened to him?" Grandpa put his hand on my shoulder. "Let's not jump to conclusions. First, we need to verify your father's whereabouts and whether he knows about these letters." "I know someone who can help us," Grandpa replied. "A private investigator I've used for business matters. Very discreet, very thorough. I'll call him right now." As Grandpa made the call, I sat down heavily in one of his leather chairs, staring at the fake letter and the wooden bird carving. If this wasn't from my father, who carved the bird? Was it purchased somewhere? And the photograph? It was definitely genuine, a copy of one that had once hung in my father's apartment. Whoever was behind this knew details about our family. They had access to personal items or at least images of them. This wasn't a random scam. This was targeted, personal, and suddenly, very frightening. Thomas Keller arrived at the estate within an hour. The private investigator was not what I expected. Instead of the hard-boiled detective type from novels, he was a soft-spoken man in his 50s, with kind eyes behind rimless glasses and a methodical way of speaking. He listened carefully as we explained the situation, taking detailed notes and examining both letters without touching them. "First thing we need to do is verify Mr. Jason Montgomery's current whereabouts," he said, looking up from his notebook. "When was the last time you had confirmation of his location?" I explained about his disappearance 3 years ago and my failed attempts to contact him. "I did manage to find an address for him about 2 years ago," I added. "In Aspen, Colorado. I sent letters there but never got any response." Keller nodded. "That gives us a starting point. I'll need a recent photograph and any information you have about his habits, friends, employment history, anything that might help track his movements." Grandpa handed him a file that he had apparently prepared in advance. "This contains Jason's social security number, date of birth, last known addresses, and photos from the last time we saw him." I raised an eyebrow at my grandfather's efficiency, but I wasn't really surprised. Preparation was second nature to him. "One more thing," Keller said. "Is there any reason someone would specifically target your family for a scam beyond the obvious financial motivation, given Mr. Montgomery's wealth?" Grandpa and I exchanged glances. "I've made my share of business rivals over the decades," Grandpa admitted, "and there have been threats before, though nothing recently." "My job involves investigating financial crimes," I added. "I've written exposés on several major corporations and individuals. It's possible this could be related to my work." Keller made notes of our suggestions. "I'll look into all angles. For now, if any more communications arrive allegedly from Jason, don't respond, but contact me immediately." The next 2 days crawled by. I tried to focus on my work but found myself staring at my phone, jumping at every email notification. I kept the wooden bird on my desk, turning it over and over in my hands, searching for any clue it might contain. Keller called on the third day. "I've confirmed that the address in Aspen was indeed where your father was living until recently," he reported. "However, according to neighbors, he moved out approximately 3 weeks ago." "Did they say where he went?" I asked anxiously. "No specific destination, but several neighbors mentioned he left with a business associate, an older man with glasses and a beard. They seemed to be in a hurry." "Did this man have a name?" "The neighbors knew him only as Phil or Phillips. They said he had been visiting your father frequently in the weeks before they left." I relayed this information to Grandpa when we met for dinner that evening. "Phillips?" he repeated, frowning. "That name doesn't ring any bells in connection to Jason." "Keller is checking if Dad left a forwarding address or if his mail is being held somewhere," I said, pushing my barely touched salmon around my plate. "He's also looking into Dad's bank records and phone activity." "Good," Grandpa nodded. "We need to know if he's involved in this scheme or a victim of it." A mutual acquaintance mentioned running into my parents at an expensive resort in Arizona during the same period they were supposedly facing financial ruin. This revelation coincided with a major milestone in my career, a promotion to department manager with a substantial raise and bonus. After 8 years of discipline, saving, and career advancement, my house fund had grown significantly. The housing market in Boise was competitive, but not impossible, and mortgage rates were relatively favorable. I began seriously researching neighborhoods, attending open houses on weekends, and consulting with real estate agents. Each step brought me closer to the goal I'd been working toward for nearly a decade, while simultaneously increasing the distance between my parents and me. I made the conscious decision not to inform them of my house hunting efforts, knowing their response would only be negative and potentially interfering. By year 12 of my career, at age 31, the pieces finally aligned. My savings were sufficient for a 20% down payment, plus closing costs and an emergency fund. My credit score was excellent thanks to years of careful financial management. The promotion to department manager had further strengthened my application. I was ready to make my dream of homeownership a reality, despite everything my parents had taught me about it being the worst financial decision a person could make. The moment I received pre-approval for my mortgage was surreal. After 12 years of sacrifice and discipline, I held in my hands the official confirmation that a bank believed in my financial responsibility enough to lend me hundreds of thousands of dollars. I remember sitting in my car outside the mortgage broker's office, staring at the paperwork and feeling a strange mixture of elation and vindication. Daniel was the first person I called. "Congratulations, house hunter," he said warmly. "This calls for a celebration. A reasonably priced celebration, of course." That weekend, we celebrated with a bottle of champagne on the balcony of my apartment, toasting to the next chapter of my life. The following day, the serious business of house hunting began in earnest. I had a clear vision of what I wanted: a modest 2-bedroom home in a safe neighborhood with a reasonable commuting distance to my office. My real estate agent, Rachel, was refreshingly straightforward about the process. "In this market, you might need to make offers on several houses before one gets accepted," she warned. "Try not to get emotionally attached too quickly." That advice proved difficult to follow. The first few houses we viewed had significant issues hiding behind their freshly painted walls, which my cautious nature couldn't overlook. Others were perfect, but received multiple offers well above asking price within hours of listing. After 6 weeks of searching and 3 rejected offers, I began to worry that my dream might remain just that. Then Rachel called with news about a property that hadn't been officially listed yet. "The owners are relocating for work and need a quick, drama-free sale," she explained. "It's a 2-story with a small backyard in Eagle. Not flashy, but solid construction and good bones. We can see it tomorrow before it hits the market." The house was exactly what I'd been looking for. Built in the 1990s, it had been well maintained by the current owners with updated electrical and plumbing. The layout was practical, with a combined living and dining area, a functional kitchen, 2 bedrooms upstairs, and a small fenced backyard where I could imagine summer barbecues, and maybe even a garden. The neighborhood was established, with mature trees and a mix of families and professionals. I made an offer that evening, slightly above asking price, but within my budget. After a brief negotiation about the closing timeline, the sellers accepted. The inspection revealed only minor issues that they agreed to fix, and suddenly, the home buying process that had seemed so elusive was moving forward with surprising smoothness. Daniel accompanied me to all the meetings, offering moral support and a second set of eyes on the countless documents requiring signatures. "You're really doing this," he said during the final walkthrough. 12 years of ramen noodles and mist, happy hours are about to pay off." Closing day arrived with little fanfare. I signed my name dozens of times, paid the down payment and closing costs that represented years of disciplined saving, and received the keys to my first home. As we walked through the empty rooms that afternoon, I felt a profound sense of accomplishment and peace. This space was mine, earned through my own efforts, despite every obstacle. Throughout the entire process, I had deliberately avoided mentioning anything about the house to my parents. Our contact had become infrequent after their 3rd attempt to borrow money, limited to occasional holiday texts and brief, surface-level phone conversations on birthdays. I had no intention of giving them ammunition to criticize or undermine this achievement. The universe, however, had other plans. 2 weeks after moving in, while I was still surrounded by boxes and figuring out which light switches controlled which fixtures, my phone rang with my mother's number. "Lauren," she began, without preamble, her voice tight with barely controlled emotion. "We just had the most interesting conversation with Margaret Wilson." My stomach dropped. Margaret Wilson was the mother of my high school classmate Amanda and lived 3 streets over from my new house. In our small city, such coincidences weren't uncommon. "She mentioned running into you at the hardware store," my mother continued. "She congratulated us on your new house in Eagle. Imagine our surprise to hear about such a major life decision from a woman we barely know." I took a deep breath, trying to formulate a response that wouldn't escalate the situation. "I was planning to tell you once I was settled," I lied, knowing they would have tried to talk me out of the purchase had I mentioned it earlier. "We'll be there in 30 minutes, my father interjected, apparently on speakerphone. "Text us the address." The call ended before I could object. Those 30 minutes were a blur of anxiety and hurried cleaning. Daniel offered to stay for moral support, but I knew his presence would only complicate an already volatile situation. "I need to handle this myself," I told him, "but keep your phone on." My parents arrived exactly 30 minutes later, my father's silver SUV pulling into my new driveway with deliberate slowness. They examined the exterior of the house with critical eyes before ringing the doorbell, as if they were visiting a stranger rather than their daughter. The moment they stepped inside, the interrogation began. My father paced the living room, firing questions about purchase price, interest rate, and property taxes. My mother moved through the rooms with an expression of barely concealed disapproval, running her finger along surfaces as if checking for dust, and making small huffing sounds at my modest furniture. "I can't believe you did this without consulting us," my father finally said, his voice rising. "After everything we taught you about the financial trap of homeownership, this is exactly the kind of impulsive decision we tried to protect you from." "Impulsive?" I echoed in disbelief. "I've been saving for this for 12 years. I've researched the market for 3 years. I put 20% down and got a fixed-rate mortgage well within my budget." "You've been planning this behind our backs for years," my mother said, her voice wounded as if I'd been plotting something criminal rather than a standard adult milestone. "I didn't tell you because I knew this would be your reaction," I said, gesturing to their angry expressions. "I'm 31 years old. I don't need permission or approval for my financial decisions." My father's face reddened. "After everything we've done for you, all the financial wisdom we tried to impart. And this is how you repay us, by rejecting our guidance and wasting your money on this liability." He spat the last word like a curse. The argument escalated as they moved from criticizing the house itself to questioning my judgment, my career choices, and ultimately my character. Each room they inspected triggered new complaints. The kitchen was too small. The backyard would be a maintenance nightmare. The neighborhood was either going downhill or pretentiously overpriced, depending on which parent was speaking. The final blow came when we reached the second bedroom, which I had set up as a home office. My father stared at my organized desk and bookshelves with narrowed eyes. "You've done well for yourself," he said, his tone shifting suddenly. "This career we didn't want for you has clearly been profitable, and now you have assets." The way he emphasized the last word sent a chill down my spine. "I think it's time you showed some gratitude for the sacrifices we made raising you," he continued. "We invested everything in your future, and now that investment should provide returns." I stared at him in shock. "What exactly are you suggesting?" "We're your parents, Lauren. We're entitled to share in your success. We estimate that raising you cost approximately $400,000. Now that you're acquiring valuable property, it's time to discuss repayment." The conversation descended into threats and ultimatums. They wanted me to either sell the house and give them half the proceeds or take out a home equity loan to repay my debt to them. When I refused both options, my father delivered the threat that would change everything. If you won't acknowledge your financial obligations to us voluntarily, we have other options. Don't forget that your mother and I have detailed records of every penny we spent on you. The courts will recognize our investment in your future. They left with a final warning. I had 1 week to do the right thing before they would take legal action. As their car pulled away, I stood in the doorway of my new home, the achievement that represented years of hard work now tainted by their toxic entitlement. I didn't know then that they were entirely serious about their threat, or how soon I would find myself facing them, not just across my living room, but across a courtroom. Exactly 8 days after my parents' ultimatum, a courier delivered an envelope that would turn my world upside down. The official court summons felt heavy in my hands, the formal legal language stating that James and Patricia Bennett were suing their daughter Lauren Bennett for financial compensation related to parental investment and unjust enrichment. I sat on my front steps for nearly an hour, the papers trembling in my hands, trying to comprehend the reality that my own parents were actually taking me to court over buying a house. The lawsuit claimed they were entitled to 50% of my home's value as a return on investment for financial and emotional support provided during my formative years. They were asking the court to either force the sale of my home or require me to pay them half its appraised value. The legal complaint included a detailed accounting of alleged expenses: food, clothing, shelter, education, medical care, transportation, extracurricular activities, and even an assigned monetary value for emotional labor and life guidance. Each category had estimated monthly costs, multiplied by 18 years, with compound interest applied. The total sum they claimed to have invested in me was just over $400,000. When I finally managed to call Daniel, my voice was barely recognizable through the tears. "They actually did it," I choked out. "They're suing me. My own parents are suing me for buying a house." Daniel arrived within 20 minutes, bringing Sarah with him. They found me still sitting on the steps, unable to move past the shock of such a profound betrayal. "This is insane," Sarah said after reading through the documents. "Parents don't get to bill their children for raising them. That's not how family works." Daniel was already researching on his phone. "You need a lawyer, Lauren. A good one. This might be a ridiculous lawsuit, but you still have to respond properly." The next morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in my career and began contacting attorneys. After 3 consultations with lawyers who seemed either overly dismissive or eager to escalate the family drama, I found Rebecca Lee. Her measured response and clear expertise in family law made her the obvious choice. "I've seen cases like this before," Rebecca explained during our first meeting. "They're rarely successful, but they can be emotionally draining and expensive to defend. Parents occasionally try to claim financial compensation from adult children, especially when substantial assets are involved. The courts generally recognize that parents have a legal obligation to support their minor children without expectation of repayment." Her confidence was reassuring, but the process ahead remained daunting. "We'll need to document your financial independence," she continued. "Prove that you purchased the house entirely with your own earned income and, ideally, demonstrate that your parents didn't provide significant financial support during your adulthood or contribute to your home purchase." The following weeks became a blur of legal preparations and emotional turmoil. I took a week of personal leave from work to gather documentation. Tax returns from my college jobs, scholarship and financial aid records, bank statements showing my disciplined saving pattern, and mortgage application materials proving I had no co-signers or financial assistance with the down payment. My boss, Mark, was surprisingly understanding when I briefly explained the situation. Family financial disputes can be uglier than divorces, he said with a sympathetic wince. Take whatever time you need, and let me know if you need me to testify about your earnings and work history. My colleague stepped up to cover my projects during my absences, offering support in ways that highlighted the contrast between chosen family and biological ties. Daniel spent evenings helping me organize documentation and weekends distracting me from the looming court date with hikes and simple pleasures that required no financial outlay. Sarah, now working night shifts, would come over during her days off to help sort through old financial records and provide emotional support. Your parents' behavior says everything about them and nothing about you, she reminded me regularly. This isn't your fault. Despite this support network, the psychological toll mounted. I began experiencing anxiety symptoms, insomnia, loss of appetite, and difficulty concentrating at work. The home I had worked so hard to obtain no longer felt like the sanctuary I had envisioned. Each creak and settling sound in the night became my parents' footsteps coming to take away what I had earned. At Rebecca's recommendation, I began seeing Dr. Sharma, a therapist specializing in family trauma. Our sessions revealed patterns I had normalized but were actually deeply dysfunctional. What you're describing is financial abuse, she explained during our second session. Your parents' control of your earnings as a minor, their attempts to monitor your accounts as an adult, and now this lawsuit all reflect a pattern of using money as a tool for control rather than respecting your autonomy. This framework helped me understand my parents' behavior, but it didn't lessen the pain of their betrayal. The lawsuit felt like the final confirmation that they viewed me not as a daughter to love, but as an investment to exploit. Nights were the hardest, when defenses weakened and doubts crept in. Had I been ungrateful? Did I truly owe them something for raising me? Was there some moral debt beyond legal obligations? Dr. Sharma helped me work through these questions, distinguishing between genuine gratitude and obligatory compliance, between healthy family interdependence and toxic entitlement. Children don't ask to be born, she reminded me. Parents choose to have children and are legally obligated to provide for them until adulthood. Love should be unconditional, not an invoice to be paid. As the court date approached, my anxiety peaked. Rebecca was confident in our legal position, but warned me about the emotional aspects of the proceeding. They'll likely make claims that feel personally attacking. Remember that the court is concerned with legal facts, not emotional appeals. Try to remain factual and calm, no matter what they say. The night before the hearing, I sat in my backyard, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. This small patch of earth represented everything I had worked for. Every sacrifice I had made, every extra shift I had taken, every social event I had declined. It was more than property. It was the physical manifestation of my independence from the financial manipulation I had endured since childhood. As darkness fell, I made a promise to myself. Regardless of the court's decision, I would no longer allow my parents' distorted relationship with money to dictate my worth or happiness. Their lawsuit had severed the remaining threads of our relationship, but perhaps that clean break was necessary for my healing to truly begin. Tomorrow would determine whether I kept my home, but today I had already reclaimed my sense of self-worth from their toxic grasp. The Ada County Courthouse was an imposing structure of granite and marble, its formal architecture a physical reminder of the serious nature of legal proceedings. I arrived 90 minutes early at Rebecca's recommendation, dressed in a conservative navy suit that projected professionalism and stability. Daniel and Sarah sat in the gallery for moral support, while my parents and their attorney occupied the opposite side of the courtroom, pointedly avoiding eye contact. My father wore his court suit, the same one he wore to funerals and other somber occasions. My mother had chosen a subdued floral dress that made her appear more vulnerable and maternal than her usual style. Their presentation was clearly calculated to reinforce their narrative as sacrificing parents wronged by an ungrateful daughter. Judge Margaret Ellison, a woman in her 60s with silver-streaked hair and penetrating eyes, called the court to order precisely on time. After reviewing the case documents, she looked between the two parties with an expression that suggested she had seen similar family disputes before and found them all equally troubling. "Before we proceed," she began, "I want to clarify that family disagreements about money are best resolved through mediation rather than litigation. Has mediation been attempted in this matter?" My parents' attorney, Mr. Sullivan, rose quickly. "Your Honor, the defendant rejected all attempts at private resolution, leaving my clients no choice but to seek judicial remedy." Rebecca countered immediately. "That's not accurate, Your Honor. The plaintiff's idea of resolution was demanding 50% of my client's home value with no legal basis. There was no good faith negotiation offered." Judge Ellison nodded, making a note before continuing. "I understand. Let's proceed with opening statements then. Plaintiff first." Mr. Sullivan presented my parents' case with practiced emotional manipulation. He described them as devoted parents who had invested everything in their only child, sacrificing their own financial security to provide me with opportunities. He claimed they had foregone homeownership themselves to direct resources toward my development and education. According to their narrative, my success was directly attributable to their sacrifices, and my refusal to share the fruits of that success constituted unjust enrichment. The plaintiffs are not asking for anything beyond fair compensation for their substantial investment in the defendant's future," he concluded. "They supported her for 18 years, and now they simply seek a reasonable return on that investment in their retirement years." When Rebecca's turn came, her approach was factual and methodical. She outlined my financial independence since age 18, documenting how I had worked multiple jobs while carrying a full course load in college. She highlighted that I had received zero financial contribution from my parents for education, housing, or any other expenses since high school graduation. Most importantly, she emphasized that the house had been purchased entirely with my earned income after 12 years of careful saving. "Your Honor, there is no legal basis for the plaintiff's claim," she stated clearly. "Parents have a legal obligation to support minor children without expectation of repayment. Miss Bennett purchased her home with funds she earned and saved herself, with no financial contribution from the plaintiffs. Furthermore, we will demonstrate that far from supporting her financially, the plaintiffs actually took substantial portions of Miss Bennett's own earned income during her teenage years under the guise of saving it for her education, money that was never returned or accounted for." Judge Ellison seemed particularly interested in this last point, making additional notes before gesturing for the testimony phase to begin. My parents went first, each taking the stand to detail their version of my upbringing with emphasis on their financial sacrifices. My father presented spreadsheets documenting estimated costs of raising me, while my mother provided emotional testimony about forgoing vacations and luxury items to provide for my needs. During cross-examination, Rebecca methodically dismantled their narrative. She questioned my father about the 70% family contribution he had required from my teenage earnings, asking where those funds had gone and why they had never been returned. She pressed my mother about their frequent vacations and her designer handbag collection, which contradicted their claims of financial hardship. Most effectively, she had them confirm that they had provided zero financial support for my college education, despite claiming it as part of their investment. When my turn came to testify, Rebecca guided me through my financial journey. I described working multiple jobs throughout college while maintaining a high GPA, the scholarships and financial aid I had secured independently, and the disciplined saving regimen I had followed for 12 years to afford my home. I provided bank statements showing regular deposits from legitimate employers and the gradual growth of my savings through consistent contributions rather than large gifts or windfalls. The most powerful testimony, however, came from unexpected allies. Professor David Carter had traveled 3 hours to appear as a character witness, testifying about my academic excellence despite working multiple jobs and confirming that I had received no parental financial support during college. Lauren was one of my most dedicated students, he stated firmly. She often came to class exhausted from overnight shifts, yet maintained exceptional grades through sheer determination. She mentioned several times that she was entirely self-supporting, as her parents believed financial independence was an important life lesson. Mrs. Rivera, my former high school neighbor, testified about observing me leaving for early morning jobs before school and working late evening shifts throughout my teenage years. I would see her waiting for the bus in her grocery store uniform at 5:30 in the morning on weekends, she recalled. No 16-year-old works those hours unless they have to. The most damaging testimony for my parents' case came from Mr. Larson, the manager of my high school grocery store job. He had kept meticulous records and remembered me specifically because of an unusual situation. Lauren's father came to me asking that we direct deposit her checks to an account he controlled. Mr. Larson explained. I refused, as it's company policy to pay minor employees directly unless legally required otherwise. He was quite insistent about having control over her earnings. As the testimony continued, Judge Ellison's expression grew increasingly concerned when hearing about my parents' financial control tactics. The turning point came during redirect examination of my father when Rebecca asked about specific investments made with my college fund. You testified earlier that you invested Lauren's college fund for her benefit, Rebecca began. Can you provide documentation of these investments and their current value? My father shifted uncomfortably. Those records would be difficult to locate after so many years. Did you maintain separate accounts for these funds, or were they commingled with your personal finances? We maintained a unified investment approach for efficiency. So, you deposited Lauren's earnings into your own accounts for management purposes? Yes. And when Lauren needed this money for college, you told her it was unavailable. Where exactly were these funds at that time? My father's composure finally cracked. We had household expenses. We provided for her for 18 years. That money was compensation for all we'd invested in her. The courtroom fell silent at this outburst. Judge Ellison leaned forward, her expression stern. Mr. Bennett, are you testifying that you appropriated your daughter's earnings for your own use while telling her you were saving them for her education? My father's subsequent attempt to backpedal only worsened his position. By the time Rebecca finished her questioning, the true nature of my parents' financial relationship with me was painfully clear to everyone in the courtroom. After a brief recess, Judge Ellison delivered her ruling with barely contained disapproval. The court finds no legal basis for the plaintiff's claim of entitlement to the defendant's property. Parents have a legal obligation to support minor children without expectation of financial return. The evidence clearly shows that Miss Bennett purchased her home with funds she earned independently, without contribution from the plaintiffs. She continued with a pointed addendum. Furthermore, the evidence suggests the plaintiffs may have inappropriately converted the defendant's teenage earnings to their own use under false pretenses. While that matter is beyond the scope of today's proceedings, the court notes that Miss Bennett would likely have grounds for her own claim regarding those funds should she choose to pursue it. The case was dismissed with prejudice, meaning my parents could not refile the same claim. Judge Ellison also took the unusual step of ordering my parents to pay my legal fees, citing the frivolous and vexatious nature of their lawsuit. As the courtroom began to empty, I remained seated, overcome with conflicting emotions. The legal victory felt hollow against the finality of the family rupture it represented. My parents left without speaking to me, my father's face rigid with anger, my mother refusing to meet my eyes. I had won the case and kept my home, but lost any possibility of reconciliation with the people who should have been celebrating my achievement rather than trying to claim it as their own. As Rebecca packed her briefcase, she offered a perspective that would help shape my path forward. Family should lift you up, not tear you down. Sometimes the healthiest family is the one you choose, not the one you're born into. Looking at Daniel and Sarah waiting supportively by the door, I realized the truth in her words. The family that had truly supported me wasn't the one suing me for my achievements, but the one celebrating them. The days following the court case were a storm of contradictory emotions. Relief that my home remained securely mine, warred with grief over the final destruction of my family relationships. Vindication at the judge's ruling competed with lingering doubts about whether I could have somehow prevented this outcome. The legal battle was over, but the emotional aftermath had just begun. The first week, I threw myself into physical labor around the house, painting walls and assembling furniture until exhaustion forced me to sleep. It was easier to focus on tangible improvements than to process the reality that my parents had literally sued me for daring to achieve financial independence on my terms. Each improvement to the house became both an act of defiance and healing, a statement that this space was mine despite their attempts to claim it. "You know, you don't have to do everything at once," Daniel remarked gently one evening, finding me obsessively sanding cabinet doors at midnight. "The house isn't going anywhere. Neither am I." His steady presence became my anchor in those first turbulent weeks. He understood when I needed space and when I needed company, bringing takeout on evenings when cooking felt overwhelming and quietly working on his laptop nearby when I couldn't bear to be alone with my thoughts. Without pressuring me for commitment or decisions about our relationship, he simply showed up consistently, proving through actions rather than words that not everyone who loves you keeps a ledger of what they're owed in return. Sarah organized a small housewarming gathering a month after the court case, inviting only people who knew the situation and supported me unconditionally. Professor Carter came bearing a houseplant and wisdom. "Your parents taught you who not to become." That's a valuable lesson, though not the one they intended. My colleagues brought practical gifts and left discussions of work at the office. For a few hours, laughter filled the rooms that had witnessed only stress and tears in recent weeks. As summer progressed, I began attending a support group for adults with dysfunctional family relationships. Hearing others share experiences of parental manipulation, control, and betrayal helped normalize my own situation. I wasn't alone in having parents who viewed children as investments rather than individuals to nurture. I wasn't uniquely ungrateful or defective for setting boundaries and protecting myself. Family estrangement is sometimes the healthiest option, the group facilitator explained during one particularly difficult session. Continuing toxic relationships out of obligation only perpetuates harmful patterns. Sometimes love means walking away until real change occurs, even if that change never comes. Gradually, I began transforming my house into a true home, one room at a time. The living room became a gathering space for game nights with friends. The kitchen, once a source of anxiety about frugality and scarcity, became a place of experimentation and abundance as I learned to cook meals that nourished rather than merely sustained. The backyard sprouted a small vegetable garden, each growing plant a symbol of patience and care. Most significantly, I converted the spare bedroom from a hastily arranged home office into a multi-purpose space that reflected my evolving priorities. One corner housed a comfortable reading chair beside bookshelves filled with financial wisdom I wished I'd had access to in my youth. Another held a desk for creative projects, rather than just work. The walls displayed photographs of chosen family and achievements that made me proud, creating a visual reminder of how far I'd come. 6 months after the court case, I received an unexpected letter from my mother. Inside was not the apology I might have hoped for, but a request to meet and put the unpleasantness behind us. There was no acknowledgement of wrongdoing, no indication that anything fundamental had changed in their perspective. After discussing it with Dr. Sharma, I responded with clear boundaries. I would consider rebuilding a relationship only after they demonstrated understanding of why their actions were harmful and respected my autonomy going forward. Their response was telling in its absence. My boundaries were apparently too high a price for reconciliation. While the finality of this realization brought fresh grief, it also brought clarity. I couldn't change my parents or make them see me as a person rather than a possession. I could only change how I responded to them and what I allowed in my life. As the 1-year anniversary of homeownership approached, Daniel surprised me with a custom doormat reading, "Earned, not given." That small gesture of understanding brought tears to my eyes and crystallized the most profound lesson of this painful journey. True security comes not from what others provide, but from what we build ourselves, brick by brick, choice by choice, day by day. The financial wisdom I gained through this experience became something I felt compelled to share. With encouragement from Professor Carter, I began volunteering at a local community center, teaching basic financial literacy to young adults aging out of foster care and others without family financial guidance. Helping these young people understand healthy financial boundaries and practical skills for independence became a way to transform my pain into purpose. "You explain this stuff differently," one participant told me after a workshop on building credit responsibly. "Like you actually get how scary it is to figure out money when no one taught you right." That comment led to more workshops, eventually expanding into a regular series sponsored by local credit unions. The curriculum I developed specifically addressed financial independence for those with challenging family dynamics, covering not just practical skills, but also the emotional and psychological aspects of money that traditional financial education often overlooks. Today, my house is fully mine in every sense. The mortgage payments represent freedom, not burden. Each room reflects choices made from desire rather than deprivation. The financial discipline that once felt like a prison of necessity has transformed into a tool for creating the life I truly want, not one dictated by others' expectations or demands. Daniel and I are now engaged, planning a future that honors both togetherness and independence. We're discussing combining households while maintaining healthy financial boundaries, creating a partnership built on mutual respect rather than control or obligation. The lessons learned from my parents' example serve as a constant reminder of the relationship dynamics we explicitly choose to avoid. The most profound change, however, has been internal. I no longer seek validation or approval from people incapable of providing it. I recognize that family is defined by mutual care and respect, not merely by blood relation. Most importantly, I understand that love doesn't keep a balance sheet, and true gifts come without invoices attached. If you're watching this and struggling with similar family dynamics around money or control, please know you're not alone. Establishing healthy boundaries isn't selfish, it's essential for your well-being. Your achievements belong to you, and no one is entitled to claim them as their own. Have you experienced financial control or manipulation from family members? How did you handle it? Share your story in the comments below, and if this resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more authentic conversations about navigating difficult family dynamics. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, your worth isn't measured by what others can take from you, but by what you choose to build for yourself.